Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Perdue, and tonight I'm joined by our other hosts, Ron Lanham and Wayne Barnes. In our first episode, you got to hear a little bit of our backstory. Our second episode,
our second episode got hijacked, okay? So that's what happened, right?
That's exactly what happened. And so this is breaking news. We were reached with a witness report from Kanawha State Forest, which is just up the road from us, and it's really in our backyard. And there was a guy there that's a friend of mine and Ron's that was doing some research there in an unrelated field to this. It was actually in the herpetological field, and going out and checking on some sites due to the nice spring wet weather we've had recently. And a lot of these animals are coming out of hibernation and just starting to become active again for the first time this year. And he had a rather unsettling account. So he reached out to us and was kind of hoping that we were going to tell him that this thing that happened was a normal event.
I kind of got that too. Like, I think you wanted some reassurance that, this was normal.
Come to find out, this was of the wild and weird variety. And we were actually able to make it out on site the very next day. And we were able to uncover some very exciting evidence. But before we get to that, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, you're going to get to meet John and hear the story straight out of his mouth. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hey, John, how are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. So we're just going to go ahead and start off this section with your report. Go ahead and in your own words, just walk us through what happened that night.
So basically I was going out, like you touched on, just to look for reptiles and amphibian species that are moving this time of year. Nothing abnormal at all. I go there 5 to 6 days a week, easy.
You're one of the more active hobby herpetologists that I know of, especially in this area. So you definitely are out in the woods more than just about anybody that I know.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time. I'll be out there in like the mornings, come home, eat, do some things, go out and again in the evening just to see, what's moving across the roads. And I mean, you find, some pretty cool things out there. So I don't know, it just piques my interest to be out in the woods constantly, just looking around and seeing, observing whatever I can.
Right on. So, you're out on Sunday night, right?
Yeah, it was Sunday night. Yep.
So walk us through what went down on Sunday night, because this wasn't your average research night.
Yeah, no, definitely nothing average. So basically, I mean, it was shaping up, to be your average good night. It had rained early that morning. Had gotten a little bit warm that afternoon. It was starting to rain again that evening. So I just, I knew from prior experience that there was going to be, a lot of animals moving that night. Chance to get a lot of good data and a lot of good photos of just stuff, crawling throughout the night. I got to Kanawha State Forest. It was a little bit before daylight, so me and the person that was with me, we drove, out past Kanawha State. Well, not past Kanawha State Forest, but past the vernal pools I usually stop at. We turned around, like right where the road turns in to the one-way and starts to go up towards the hill. There's like, I think 3 or 4 shelters there. We turned around in that parking lot. It was starting to rain again now. It was getting darker. The conditions were perfect at this point. So I start going back towards the area that I planned on checking that night. Whenever we pulled in, I got out of the car and immediately there was a toad. So I'm like, hey, this is going to be a good night. I take a picture of this toad, and I take like 2 or 3 steps towards the vernal pool um, that I planned on checking that night. And I have no idea how to explain what this sound was, but it was nothing I've ever heard before in the woods. It sent just chills down my back. When I turned and looked at the person that was with me, they were actually still sitting in the vehicle, and they had no color in their face at all, and their eyes were as big as I've ever seen on anybody.
Wow.
So my immediate thought was, they heard it too. Whatever this was, like they heard it too. I'm not, completely crazy, I guess. So I immediately get back to the car because I mean this sound was just bone chilling. I don't know how else to explain it. Like something was in that valley, and I was in that valley, and it wasn't happy about it. So when I get back in the car, me and the person that were with me are just looking at each other. I mean, it felt like minutes, but it couldn't have been, seconds. And we're just, what was that? And then we heard it again, and it was so chilling to hear it again. It sounded closer, and like the bass off this thing's voice just, I mean, it chilled you. Whatever it was, I mean, it sent chills immediately down your back. So my only thought at this point, like, I know everyone always is like, oh, I would record it or, whatever. The only thing I thought about was getting out of this place. And I mean, I've spent thousands of hours in this park recording data and pictures. I've seen coyotes out there. I've heard them. This was nothing I've ever heard before, ever.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty astounding. And so you just left at that point, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So, well, immediately I got in my car. I was in the car and we heard it, and I went down the road. I pulled over a little bit, maybe 100 yards down the road into another little parking spot, and we just kind of looked at each other. And there was actually another car out there that night. I don't know if they heard it or what. They were, if you're familiar with the park, in the main drag, basically, they were maybe a quarter mile down from where I was. And they bolted out of that park as well. So I'm not sure if, somebody else out there heard this, but it was crazy. And that's whenever I immediately was just like, something's out here. I'm out.
Yeah, and no one blames you there.
So when you got home that night, what was one of the feelings that you had when you first got back and settled into the house after all this took place?
Well, so I mean, like I had, told you originally, I was literally so freaked out, but this night was going to be so good that I drove all the way to another state park, which is Beach Fork.
That's dedication.
Yeah, anybody familiar with the area knows how far, Canal State Forest and Beach Fork are from each other whenever you're driving.
That's an easy hour and 10-minute drive.
Yeah, so roughly that's about how long it took me. So whenever we were in the park, it was right at dark, between 8:30 and 9. And whenever I got to Beach Fork, it was 10:20. So I mean, my trip into Canal State Forest was cut really, really short that night.
Wow.
I got a couple questions.
Were you still unnerved while you were at Beach Fork?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So even there, I mean, that's another park that I'm, pretty familiar with documenting, what kind of species I come across down there. But there was still just being in the woods was real unsettling. And even there only made 2 passes through before I was like, I'm just going home. I got to figure out what this was.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you really had to decompress a little bit afterwards, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I knew I wasn't going to sleep. I mean, that was for sure.
Yeah, you even said that. I think we talked about that later, about some of the problems with sleeping and whatnot. So this really affected you in more than one way that night. It continues, sort of, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So I heard Wayne pipe up. He said he had a question. And John, Wayne's also another Sasquatch investigator. He's with an organization called BSI, and they're based out of southern Indiana. So he's got many years of Bigfoot investigation under his belt. So I'm sure these are going to be some good questions.
Well, they may seem kind of weird because I feel like I'm going to ask you questions that a police officer would ask you if you, if he's interrogating you. But um, I just a couple things keep going through my head. So you said the person that was with you stayed in the vehicle, and they heard it too, or you assumed at the moment that they heard it too, based on their expression and their facial features. Um, and this is going to sound silly, but if they were still in the vehicle, were the doors and the windows up or down or closed?
So the windows were up because it was raining. So they heard it through the rain in the vehicle with the doors shut, the windows up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how long was this? I mean, how loud was this? Not long. How loud was
Um,
it?
I mean, it was nothing I've ever heard.
Could you hear an echo
I
of
don't know
it?
how else to explain it. It was just,
That's a good question. Could you hear an echo maybe? Like, do you remember anything like that, or is it just a blur at this point?
yeah. I mean, so the only thing I remember, like for sure, no echoes or anything, just those two
Okay.
very loud, very distinct. I mean, it's, I don't know how else to explain it other than like a agitated groan that I was there.
Okay. Okay. So it's a groan or a growl is what you're kind of saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to call it a growl.
Okay.
Just
More like
because
a grunt?
yeah, more of a grunt and
Okay.
howl mix. I mean, it was
Okay.
nothing I've ever heard. I mean, that's the only way to explain
Don't
it.
worry, we're not going to make you do it. It's okay.
Yeah, I've actually got the pleasure of hearing this sound once today.
We're not going to do that.
That was my next question, actually. No, I'm just teasing.
Yeah,
What else you could
John did imitate the sound for me earlier today while we were on site. We actually went to the park today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But he imitated the sound as best as he could, and it was a combination of a grunt and like a moaning howl kind of thing.
Okay.
It is the way that he had imitated it with us, and it was definitely more of a primate sounding sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is one of the things that John actually included in his original report to me.
Yeah.
That was
He
it
said it was
sounded
more
like a primate.
Yeah. Yeah, more primate, and it was very deep is what struck me out of the original.
Yeah, I mean, the sound was like included in that original report. It was such an eerie sound that I'd never heard before. And I mean, I honestly, as bad as the sound, was hoping that somebody was getting murdered. I mean,
Yeah.
as bad as that sound, I was hoping that they
Yeah.
found a body or something, just so there was. That's what I heard. But
Well, let
But
me ask you
no.
this. Let me ask this. And this is because a lot of reports come along with this. So I know it was raining, you said. Was it raining really hard or light or
so it was just like an average. It wasn't anything crazy.
just a consistent rain?
Yeah, it was consistent. I mean, I wouldn't say the drops were huge, but they weren't like light drops either.
It was probably what we had here the day or two before where I'm at, because it seems to hit you all, within a day or two after it hits us. So I know what you're talking about. Let me ask you another question real quick. Was there any kind of smell or anything that you noticed?
So the only smell was really like just that damp, wet smell. It had rained that whole day, so the only smell in the air really was that rain that was,
Gotcha.
I guess, coming up off the road and stuff. The humidity
Mhm.
from the road,
Mhm.
the steam.
There was no smell emitted by you, huh?
Yeah, luckily
Almost.
Almost.
I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually have been there. So
Yes.
you're very qualified to ask these questions.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
that was literally my two original thoughts was, get out of here, and I really hope it doesn't smell on my way home, because it was definitely unsettling.
So let me ask you this one now. So this is an area that you go to 5 to 6 days a week, roughly.
Yeah,
give
at
or
least
take.
sometimes it'll be like more than once in those days.
Yeah. So since this encounter, besides being with Joe and Russ, have you been back? Do you plan on going back?
So I was telling them today, whenever we met out there, I did go back in last night, but it's a completely different feeling. afraid to get out of the vehicle, even on the road.
Yeah.
And I was actually, my senses were so peaked last night that I was hearing things on the hill, and I would shine my light, and it would be like literally a coyote or something would be there. So it was, whenever I go back in there right now, it's like that super sense is in there. That's fight or flight mode is still there.
Yeah, heightened sense of awareness of everything around you.
Yep.
So
Completely understandable.
I got one more question, Joe. When you heard this grunt, howl, whatever we want to call it, like when I've heard it a few times in my life, and some of them they don't bother you, and some of them, of course, you hear it and you go, oh, that's interesting, and then some of them sound obviously like yours, really close. And I've heard one at one point, and it sounded really close, and it kind of went through me, that feeling of you kind of get that reverb or something through your body. Did you have any feeling of that?
Oh yeah, the fear was just like unbelievable whenever I heard whatever it was. It literally like consumed every molecule in my body to the point where my first instinct typically is take a picture, because that's what I do. I go out and I record, I just take pictures. And that was so far from my mind at that point that literally the only thing I thought of was get out of here.
So it's kind of an unnatural sound that you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard anything even remotely close to how chilling that was.
Gotcha.
And what this does is it also answers a lot of the question of the skeptics or people who might be interested in the phenomena who haven't had encounters when they say, well, you had a phone on you. Why didn't you turn on? That's the last thing in your mind.
I can tell you right now, from seeing something that you can't quite explain to thinking about something that you can't quite explain is a completely different thing. When you come face to face with something that doesn't fit into your reality as you know it, and you may think you're prepared for that, but when you see that, no, it's get out. I've been there. I understand it perfectly well.
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
Wayne has too.
And it wasn't just my phone. I mean, I had my Canon camera with me, my GoPro. Like, none of that mattered. None of it mattered.
Get out is what mattered.
Well, Ron, I'm a little bit slower in the uptake. I run towards it first.
I know you do. It's strange.
Yeah, there are some weirdos that run towards the sound of an explosion. I'm one of those people too. So the very next day after John sent in the report to us over at Wild and Weird, I was actually able to get out on site. The weather had remained pretty stable.
It was
it was a beautiful
weather
day
is what
out.
it was.
What is it?
It was perfect weather for that is what it was.
Yeah, it was. It really was. The air was still damp, but it was a beautiful day, and the ground stayed moist. So all of the evidence that was laid down by anything that would have made this grunt or this vocalization that John heard would still be in the area. And lo and behold, it was.
Well, why don't you walk us through that? Because this is a story in its own. Because I got a phone call after this happened, and I'm like, wait, what? Because I couldn't be there for this historic moment, but I was sort of there. Got the phone call, and he's like, I found this. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And then, of course, the phone goes dead because, why not?
Yeah, we're out in the middle of nowhere.
So walk us through. You got there on site.
Yep, I was there on site, and there were very, very few things that I could compare this to, just in the level of amazement that I had literally within moments of stepping out of the truck. Because typically when you go to an investigation site, you are not anticipating to find anything.
Usually you don't.
You're going to comb the area. You're going to look for any kind of trace evidence you can find, and just hope beyond hope that something is there that you'll be able to record as solid data.
You go with the mindset to debunk it.
You do.
Right. You're trying to find everything else that it could be.
Mm-hmm.
So I arrived on site, and as soon as I opened up the truck door and stepped out and looked over in the direction of the vernal pool, there were two massive footprints that were about 6 inches deep. After I made it over to where they were to measure them, they were 6 inches deep into the topsoil. And they were right on the edge. One of them was half in, half out of the vernal pool. The other one was right on the edge. And my jaw about hit the floor. And I said, well, there's what I'm after. So I started making my way around. I had to try to navigate and find a way that basically I wanted to find a way an animal would make its way over that way, rather than the obvious human kind of thought of, let's walk down the road down here and cross over in this nice, clear area. So as I made it around, there was this one sapling that was right on the edge of the creek that had been broken in two different places and bent in perpendicular 90-degree angles.
Now we saw this in the video, right? This is
yes, this is
you were
documented
shooting video and document. Okay.
Yes,
sure.
This was documented in the video. And then as I'm making my way over to the original two footprints that I found another footprint. And so I marked it on the ground, and because I don't want to lose track of what I'm doing. I'm after those tracks that are over here, and then I'm going to work my way back, because now I have an idea that this creature, whatever it was, had basically moved all over the place on this flat. So I'm going to have to search the whole area. And I'm like, well, this turned into a little bit bigger of a process than I thought, but it's doable.
So you basically grid searched, right?
Yeah, I grid searched the area, and I was actually able to, in total, uncover 6 different sets of tracks. 2 of which were too shallow to really cast, because the type of soil that's over there is like a sandy, peaty clay mixture. So it's really some of the worst material you could possibly cast anything in, just because the texture is awful. But I went over to the tracks that were over by the vernal pool, and I started to record data on those. I measured them out. They matched the footprints that I found back closer to the creek, and they were around the same size. These were just much deeper. Like I said, they were 6 inches deep. One of them was full of water, so there's no way to cast that. Mm-hmm. The other one was half full of water, and the way it was situated, it wasn't going to make a good cast. Although I could make out a definitive heel, and I could see where the toes might have possibly been. It was one of those where it was just, even if I did pour casting material in, I was going to be stuck waiting for a couple hours for it to dry. So I started the grid search back to the other tracks, and that's when I found the shallow tracks they were really inconsequential. They were good data to record with video and with pictures, but it wasn't something that I wanted to waste plaster on. So I made my way back to the track that I found that I'd marked. And as I was using a chip brush to knock away some of the bigger leaves out of the way to uncover the main profile of this foot, I was looking, because I was down at ground level at this point. I'm on my hands and knees, and I look just over this track, and lo and behold, I see a very, very deep impression. So I start using the chip brush to knock away leaves from it, and lo and behold, there's another portion of the foot. So I have a left and a right footprint.
So these are the salamander casts now, right? Is that what we're talking about? Yes,
that's what we've called these. These are now the salamander casts. We've had them peer reviewed by multiple researchers. All of them really like the casts. They agree that they're authentic. And I took this data and I sent it over to John to see what he thought. And I was verifying his account and everything that took place. And I was blown away at the data that I received, but I'm going to let John tell you what he thought.
It gets even better. What did you think, John, when you saw those casts?
I think my first response to Joe was just shut up. Like,
yep, it was.
When I saw
I don't need this. I'm going to go over here and look for a reptile.
My heart fell again. I got the chills again. Yeah. It was honestly unbelievable. And then whenever he honestly sent me the video, which is posted now, and it collaborated, basically what I thought I had experienced. It was just mind blowing. Like this whole thing has just been a complete
And then
reality flip on
So,
how I
so,
feel about the woods.
so what did you think about Bigfoot before all of this? What was your thoughts on it? Just
I mean, so I was never, this thing doesn't exist, but at the same time, I thought the probability was, basically zero. But I mean, now it's it's completely flipped everything that I've ever imagined. The probability now is way higher than how unlikely it is. You hear experiences, and until you experience it yourself, you really can't say that everything out there we know about.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, we agree with
And
that. We said that so many times ourselves.
today, John and I had the opportunity to actually go out on the site because there was another researcher who's actually been he's been studying in this area for about 15 years now, and he has recorded a lot of data from the park. And he was very interested in the findings, and he wanted to have both of us come out and meet with him and go over the area and just to get a lay of the land and idea, because he was actually in that area up and down the road the same day that I was there doing the investigation. And we had just missed each other by I was there probably, I think, 2 or 3 hours earlier than him. So we just barely missed each other. But Dr. Russ Jones was able to stop by today, and we met with him, and John walked him through everything. And I think that between the investigation that we had taken a part of and what Dr. Jones was able to kind of help explain to John was that, yeah, there's Bigfoot in this area, and you've had a very real encounter. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it was really cool too as well, because Russ has been researching now for 30 years, and it was really cool to see that our collection, even though I've only been doing this for a little bit of time, our collection styles were very similar. And the way we looked at the land and whatnot, part of it also has to do with the fact that both of us were hunters. So we're looking for game trails, we're looking for disturbances and things of that nature. And we had also talked about a guy, Tom Shea, who is one of my heroes in the Bigfoot research world. He's collected more casts than anyone else ever has. And Russ was telling us today, me and John were standing there and we were talking about something, and Tom was brought up, and Russ said that he went out with him one day, and he went over and hiked about 5 or 6 miles in one way and came back. And by the time he came back, Tom was still within the first 50 feet of where he had began, because he was literally combing every section of leaves back and finding these tracks. And he already had a bunch of little markers placed for possible prints. And so the fact that Tom sits out there and takes that kind of time really inspired me to try to get back out there. That even today, because me and John went back out into the area and we started looking, and John actually found a little bit of evidence that we had missed, because I hadn't gone over this far. John and I walked farther than what I had walked the first day. And you want to go ahead and tell them about the little sticks that we found?
Yeah, so I mean, it could have been natural, I guess, but the way
it really
these X's were
this
formed, in the branches was almost like something, or I mean, it could have been a person, I suppose, but they were just perfect X's, like laid in between the branches of smaller trees. Like, it was pretty wild.
Yeah. Did you guys get pictures of that?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Yeah.
So
see those.
So now John is not only interested in herpetological research, But he is also interested in Bigfoot research.
Wow, that didn't take long.
No,
Yeah,
it
no,
didn't.
I mean, it's literally life
It's a
altering.
natural
Like once you
progression.
come to grips with
Yeah.
what happened,
Hmm.
it's almost like you have to know for sure.
John, you won't
Yeah.
come to grips. Your mind won't wrap around it.
Yeah, it's definitely still hasn't. But I think it maybe seeking those answers, I don't know, would possibly help you come to grips with it. I don't. It's like I said, life altering completely.
Typically, it just makes you ask more questions, but eventually you do come to terms with it, in my experience, that you just kind of come to the point to realize that there's a lot more to this world than what you've been told and what you think.
Everything will be fine, John, until you stop and really go, so something possibly 7 to 9 foot tall and quite a few 100 pounds was watching me.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't
So
talk
what?
about this, right, John? Because that was one of the
Yeah.
things you
Well,
told me
whenever
that
I
really
seen,
freaked you out.
where he took those casts in that
Yeah.
video, and where I knew I was standing, it it was definitely unsettling because it was the way the
Ab-
feet were positioned. It was watching me.
About how
Wait.
far was it away?
Oh man, what would you say, Joe? 30 yards, maybe?
Yeah, at the most.
I'd put it right around 20, maybe. I saw the video of this thing, and I can see where Joe's like turning the camera around, and the straight line which is just amazing, where it was hiding behind a tree, basically, is what
Yeah.
I saw from it. Is that right?
It was
Because
it
I
was
haven't
like it was
been
trying to
there.
blend in.
Yeah, that's what I kind of got from the video that you shot. I mean, you really shot a great video for documenting that, because when you pan up and you're like, here's this footprint, and and you just turned around and you see this passageway through the tree. And it's just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like it
Yeah,
was standing there behind that tree watching.
and whenever I panned up the camera, I saw the passageway through the trees moments before the camera caught it.
Yeah.
And so when you hear me say, "And there's the clearing
Yeah.
through the trees,"
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was a moment of, well,
Yeah. You hadn't really
uh,
noticed that. And then, there it is. I mean,
we are coming up against our time wall here, so I want to open it up to Ron and Wayne to go ahead and ask a couple more questions to John, and once we've answered those, we'll call it an evening.
yeah, go
Well,
ahead, Wayne. I mean,
well,
I know you've
there's
got
one.
1,000, so go ahead.
Well, yeah, I could be on here all night. There's one thing that I want you all to clear up, because a lot of people may not know. I do, because I'm a hunter also, so I know the terminology. But explain to them what a vernal pool is, because we may have
So a
listeners
vernal
that
pool
have no
is
clue.
typically they're a seasonal, just small body of water that puddles up from the rains in the spring. This particular location though has some that are there year round, which I think is what makes it a little bit better for documenting and finding species, just because there's a permanent water source there, other than the fast moving creek. But typically you would get a rainfall and then there would be like just a low spot in the forest where the water would build up long enough for like frogs to breed in and stuff.
Gotcha. Like I
Yeah.
said, I just wanted to make sure our listeners knew what that was.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
the other thing is, so now that you've had this and you're like, oh, we kind of touched on it, but then you said you even went back out, but when you're going back out now from now on, I know your senses are going to be heightened, but how is that with you always kind of feeling like something's watching you or looking over your shoulder,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Even whenever we were there today, daylight, there was hikers out. It still felt like something was in that valley, and that feeling's probably always going to be there.
But that could affect your other research in a way if you're
Yeah,
not
especially if
careful.
it's feeding on the salamanders.
Well, I'm just saying, just your senses,
Wayne's got
to
that
where
right. Yeah, for sure.
to where you're maybe missing some evidence for your other research because you kind of are looking over your shoulder. And so over time, just so you understand, over time it will lessen and you will feel a lot better. Like I still go out in the woods by myself, but I try not to if I know that there's something out there. Just me personally, I try to have my buddy, my partner with me, or I try to tell him we need to go together because we have a hot spot where we've had 5 Class A sightings on.
Oh,
So
nice.
we we try to go, we've heard a lot of things on this property, and it's like 600 acres, and with the surrounding properties who've all had sightings, it's like 1,000 acres of land. So I know that when we're out there, I'm not looking per se for anything, but I'm always watching. I always get that. You just get a weird feeling, other than any other, like normal woods I go into. It's just woods. But now that I know something's out there, and we've found hair samples and blah blah blah, it's a whole creepier feeling that something's watching you. That something, as soon as you walk towards those woods, it knows when you come in those woods, and it knows when you leave, but you can't see it. It's a freaky thing.
So I'll ask, I know, because you're going to run up into this. How do you know it wasn't, say, a bear?
I mean, I guess I don't. I'm still not really sure what it was, to be honest.
Yeah, I want to make this real clear.
I know where the
John
evidence
has never,
suggests,
ever said that it's a Bigfoot. He has never said that, and in confidence or publicly. He doesn't know what it is. He says it's something, and I think that's good.
I've never heard a bear hit that tone.
Yeah.
And,
I've got even.
Well, for the record, I don't think it was a bear, but I don't know what it was either.
I've got
I
your
know
back,
they're going to
John.
ask you that. They're going to ask you that, and you're going to hear that a lot. So, that's going to be the number one thing that everyone jumps to. Oh, it was a bear. Well,
Hey,
obviously.
John, I got your back. Ron, I can tell you why he thinks it's
Yeah,
not a
so,
bear now. Because they found footprints, buddy.
Right, yeah.
We got some tracks out of this bad boy.
I don't want to, even act like there's not bear in the area, because there are, bear in that park.
But I saw those footprints, John.
Yeah,
that's not a bear's footprints.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't sound like any bear noise I've ever heard. I mean, it was so unsettling. Just the pitch of it and how close it was just unbelievable, honestly.
So have you run into bear, obviously, out there in your research?
I haven't actually. So I've never actually personally encountered a bear in that particular park. But there are, sightings yearly.
What's the biggest thing you ran into out there? Like maybe
coyote.
Yeah, I was going to say coyote probably.
Yeah, I used to live on the other side of that park, and during the fall when all the leaves were off the tree, I could see the entrance sign to the park. And I mean, we had bear on our property every 3 or 4 nights, and they weren't small either. There was a couple that were pretty sizable bears, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of bear in that area.
Yeah. But my question, again, I know a lot of people are going to be asking this. Well, okay, why do you think it was there? I think I know why it may have been there, and I think you guys do too. I saw the pictures of the place. It looks like a perfect feeding spot.
Yeah, so even today, whenever we were walking around, we found morel mushrooms, molly moochers, we call them here in West Virginia.
Wish I went with you.
So there's mushrooms growing in the area. You've got plenty of amphibians. I mean, there's plenty of foliage.
I'm looking at one right now,
People
Ron.
would speculate that it could eat.
You got some?
Present.
Yeah.
You did not. Did he get morels for real? Is he being for real?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and just to put in into size of this park, you mentioned that the area where you are is about 1,000 acres. I think Canal State Forest is like right around 9,300 acres. So this place is
it's 93.7, I believe.
Yeah, this place is massive.
Yeah, this isn't even a park. This is just private property.
Right, yeah.
So I understand.
This place it's huge.
Yeah, most of it's wilderness area too. There are trails, but nobody really ever goes off trail at this park for the most part, except for John and a handful of others.
Too. There's mines out there too, right, guys? Because
there's mines and there's caves.
Because Dave Roberts was even telling me, he's been out. He hikes a lot and bike rides out there, and he says that he knows where there's several of them up there that are still open. They're not sealed. So again, this goes right with Bigfoot lore, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yep.
I was getting ready to say, and here we go, the Bigfoot Highway.
Yeah, it's a
much.
little bit of something there that definitely fits into it. I'll tell you this: the people we brought it before, we didn't just bring it before anybody. We brought it before people who have seen these things, people who have researched these things. One of which was, he's been involved in it for 60 years, and everybody seemed to say the same thing. it was something.
Yep, everybody likes the track casts. It was really good. And John, I just want to thank you for coming on with us tonight and telling your story and just kind of helping us to get this story out there, because it is important that these kinds of events are real. They are happening right here in West Virginia.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when somebody steps forward like you, John, and actually tells this stuff, sometimes it's just like a domino effect, and you'll get others. Oh, I saw something too, and this only helps to further validate and corroborate those other stories and accounts.
Yeah,
Much
like y'all had mentioned before. The day after, I just sat there like, man, I'm crazy. I was listening to like sound after sound after sound, like I'm losing my mind, and nothing I found matched it. So naturally, I'm like, okay, who do I know that likes the paranormal and the Bigfoot phenomena? And you guys were the only ones that I thought of. So
we are honored.
I was like, maybe they won't think I'm crazy.
No, we never think anyone's crazy.
Because I mean, even partially, it's like you still kind of feel like, am I crazy? Like, even though you know what you experienced,
you'll get that from people that are in the community and people that aren't from in the community of Bigfoot. Some people will, just so you know, so expect that. Some people will go, no, and they'll try to shoot holes in your story 1,000 times, but you have casts. You know what you saw, okay? It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's what you saw and what you have to deal with, in your head. And that's all that matters, John.
It really is. It's a personal experience, and boy, did you get a great one. I mean, there are people out there who would love to have this experience, honestly. I understand that it caused you a trauma, but man, I'm telling you, that it's pretty amazing, because we usually don't get a story like this. And if we do get a story like this, we surely don't get evidence to back up or corroborate such a story. And what you gave us is just phenomenal.
Yes, sir.
And one of the biggest takeaways, I believe, from this entire event is how quickly John reported the encounter and how quickly we were able to reach the site. Those two things in conjunction are what led to any data collection whatsoever being accumulated.
Yeah.
It is extremely important that if you have a sighting, that you report it somewhere. If you have a sighting and you're in West Virginia, report it to Wild and Weird West Virginia. We are a part of the West Virginia High Strangeness Collective. We will get on this case. We will go and research, and we will try to get you answers. With that said, John, thanks for coming on tonight. We really appreciate you sharing your encounter, and we really appreciate you getting a hold of us to have us come research. So
yes, thank you, John, and we expect to see you at Wild and Weird Con, just so you know.
Oh yeah, John's got a free pass to Wild and Weird.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure he's a lifer at this point.
A little bit.
You are welcome back anytime, John. Hopefully the next time you'll be on the other end of this, and you might be asking the questions yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I would love to be back, honestly. This has been pretty fun.
Good. I'm glad, man. If you hear of any encounters or anything like that, get a hold of us. I'd love to run out with you. I mean, we can go field herping and go look for some Bigfoot at the same time.
The best of both worlds.
Exactly. So
might even get lucky and find some more mushrooms.
Right?
I'm jealous of that one.
Well, until next time, stay wild and weird, guys.
Everybody.